Chairman Casey, I join with you in welcoming Chairman Bernanke to today's hearing on the economic outlook. Unfortunately, ominous clouds are gathering. Economic growth is nearly stagnant. We have 6.8 million fewer payroll jobs today than when the recession began in December 2007. According to economists Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff, recoveries from financial crises are weak and vulnerable to external shocks that may trigger double-dip recessions. Republican members of Congress recognize this. We are critical of the President's expensive economic policies because not only have they failed to spur job growth and restore business and consumer confidence, but also, as we feared, they've left America susceptible to a double-dip recession. Today, as we meet, America faces a growing risk from the European debt crisis. The United States and the European Union are major trading partners. I'm very concerned about the effects of contagion from the euro crisis on American financial institutions and markets, as well as the broader economy. I'm anxious, Mr. Chairman, to hear your assessment of the euro crisis and any steps the Federal Reserve may take to quarantine any contagion. In response to the financial panic, the Federal Reserve took extraordinary actions to stabilize U.S. financial institutions and markets during the fall of 2008. Many of these actions were both necessary and proper. Instead of rehashing the past, however, I would instead like to initiate a discussion on the framework for monetary policy in the future. Nobel laureate economist Robert Mundell said, "If you want a certain policy outcome, you have to use the right policy lever." Unfortunately, too many Washington policymakers are ignoring Mundell's wisdom. Monetary policy affects prices. In contrast, budget, tax, and regulatory policies affect real output and jobs. While the Great Contraction from August of 1929 to March of 1933 proved that bad monetary policy can shrink production and destroy jobs, good monetary policy cannot accelerate economic growth or foster job creation except in the very short term. Washington, Congress, affects business investment, production, and job creation through its budget, tax, and regulatory policies. If the prospects for a swelling Federal debt, higher taxes, and additional costs from the President's health care plan, as well as burdensome regulations, are deterring entrepreneurs from investing in new buildings, equipment, and software, and therefore hiring new workers, there is little the Federal Reserve can do to overcome this drag. Until 1978, the Federal Reserve's mandate regarding monetary policy was merely to provide an elastic currency. That year, the Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act, known informally as the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, was enacted. This act imposed a dual mandate on the Federal Reserve that gives equal weight to achieving both price stability and full employment. Since 1978, many countries have examined what a central bank should do and have opted for a single mandate for long-term price stability. By law, 17 member states of the European Monetary Union and 13 other developed and major developing countries have enshrined mandates for price stability, either as the sole goal or the primary goal, with the subordination of other goals for their central banks. Moreover, Australia and Canada have adopted single mandates through published statements. The time has come for Congress to reconsider the Federal Reserve's mandate. In my view, the dual mandate should be replaced with the single mandate for long-term price stability. I will introduce legislation to make this change in the near future. While some may mistakenly claim that a single mandate means maximizing employment is unimportant, history proves the best way for the Federal Reserve to maximize employment is to focus on achieving long-term price stability. Under a single mandate, the Federal Reserve would publicly announce an inflation target. The Federal Reserve would retain full operational independence from both Congress and the President to achieve that inflation target. While I may criticize certain actions that the Federal Reserve has taken, I want to be absolutely clear. For our economy's sake, the Federal Reserve must remain independent and free from any undue political pressure in implementing monetary policy. Congress should also reconsider the Federal Reserve's lender of last resort policy. I remain deeply concerned about the precedent set in 2008 regarding clearly insolvent financial institutions, especially AIG, Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. In 1913, Congress envisioned the Federal Reserve would act as a lender of last resort during financial crises. However, the Federal Reserve has never articulated a clear lender of last resort policy. As celebrated economist Alan Meltzer observed, The absence of a lender of last resort policy has three unfortunate consequences. First, uncertainty increases. No one knows what will be done. Second, troubled firms have a stronger incentive to seek a political solution. They ask Congress or the administration for support or to pressure the Federal Reserve or other agencies to save them from failure. And third, repeated rescues encourage banks to take greater risk and increase leverage. This is the well-known moral hazard problem." End of quote. If the Federal Reserve were to promulgate a clear statement about its lender of last resort policy, it would go far to diminish uncertainty, reduce the likelihood of political interventions, and mitigate the moral hazard problem. Finally, many years ago, Congress gave the responsibility for exchange rate policy to the Secretary of the Treasury. This is a vestige of the long-defunct Bretton Woods system of fiscal exchange rates. By controlling the money supply, the Federal Reserve directly affects the foreign exchange value of the U.S. dollar. Moreover, swings in exchange rate influence domestic prices. Thus, the responsibility for exchange rate policy should be moved from the Secretary of the Treasury to the Federal Reserve. Chairman Bernanke, I look forward to your testimony and the questions following. I yield back.